Well. Okay. Showtime. I'd like to call the September 3rd, 2024 budget meeting to order, starting at 7:32. All board members are here. People are here. Need the approval of the agenda. Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, public comments. We did receive one public comment, which I'm sure we'll address at the appropriate time. Were there any other ones, Rebecca, that,
Rebecca, can you change the agenda? It's on facility.
Pardon?
It's on facility.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Boy, these meetings are just causing us all kinds of problems.
let's stay after Labor Day?
You're just ahead of the game.
You were Labor Day.
Labor,
Yes.
Nope.
Oh, June? Sorry about that.
So we're going to 23-24 budget update and audit. So I'll turn that over to Stephen now. Discussion.
Thank you, Jack. So there's three, I would say more significant topics that we want to try to cover today. We're not going to be able to get through the depth that we want to get on all of them. But we'll get to, the things that need to be looked at today. So to begin with, Rebecca, would you mind pulling up the treasurer's report? Which is attachment there, please. So I want to review with the committee what went well in 23-24 and what challenges we need to work through regarding the treasurer's report. So as far as the funds that are in a strong position, I'll call your attention to Fund 73, the Employee Benefit Trust Fund. So this committee made a decision in early summer to utilize the funds held within Fund 73 to make the payment that was required for post-employment benefits in 23-24. And even with doing that, Fund 73 still saw a change in fund balance of a positive 414,000. So our employee benefit trust fund, our Fund 73, remains in a really strong fiscal position. Fund 80, the community service fund, I want to touch on that. You do see the negative change in fund balance. So that was intentional. Our community service fund balance was really too high, and it had increased as a result of a lack of activity during the COVID years. And so as a result, we had excess funding within our community service fund. So we had a plan for a couple of years to bring that fund balance down, which we have continued to do. So that was planned. In Fund 40, the Capital Projects Fund, you will see a minus 62 million. That's normal in a capital projects fund as bond proceeds are being spent on projects. So typically what happens in capital projects funds is a borrowing occurs and then the project bills are paid and that fund balance then declines over time. So that's very typical in a capital projects fund. Debt service fund 30, had a beginning fund balance of 8.5 million and ending fund balance of 7.3. Basically, we have debt service payments that are due on October 1st. The debt service payments change on a calendar year basis. In Wisconsin accounting, you levy for debt service funds on a calendar year basis. So that's the only fund where that actually happens, where the tax levy goes across fiscal years and it's calendar year based. So every year that looks a little different depending on what those actual payments are in April and October. So that fund looks a little bit different. The concerning fund is Fund 10. So Fund 10 had a decline in fund balance for the second year in a row. That fund balance without any adjustments would be 9.7% of the 24-25 expenditure budget. And Fund 10 is going to need some additional discussion beyond what we can do in the next 45 minutes. But I'll share with you some of the reasons why the fund balance and Fund 10 declined. And when this committee gets together in October and we review the fourth draft of the budget, we're going to need to circle back to some of these topics. And I feel like moving forward, we're going to have to start handling these differently. So some of the items that contributed to the change in fund balance in Fund 10 is the self-insured dental fund. Now that was a plan. Rebecca, would you mind going back to the notes for a minute? I have all of this information in the notes for the meeting. Self-insured dental program. So the self-insured dental program's fund balance had become quite large. It had become over $500,000 in the balance. Typically that had been in the 35 to 50,000 range. Again, during COVID, that had really built up. There was a plan from the district's insurance committee to increase benefits and bring down that fund balance. That those benefit changes were approved by the board a year ago in May, and it did work. The fund balance came down to 154,000 and it's still high. However, the self-insured dental program is a part of the Fund 10 fund balance. So when that declines, your Fund 10 fund balance declines. So it's just a function of change that's occurring in fund balance that was planned, but that's the net result. So another one is the next one down. So we allow building and departments. Go ahead.
Quick question.
Yep.
Now, we're subscribed on that dental. Once it's in there, it has to stay in there. Or be used for that specific cause.
I've never been asked that question before. I'd have to look into that. And we've always just left it in the dental fund, but perhaps there might be an ability to move those funds. I'd have to look at it.
So then you could move that, right? Or a new portion of that.
Yeah, let me look into that. That's a good question. The second item on their building department carryover balances. As you know, we allow building and departments to carry budgets from one fiscal year to the next. In the 23-24 fiscal year, that resulted in a decline of $261,000 in that particular fund balance. So 261,000 compared to where it was the year before. Basically, buildings and departments were using their carryover in 23-24, which brings down that fund balance. The next one, which is definitely a budgeting challenge. During the audit process, we are required to put on our balance sheet enough funds to pay the health insurance bills throughout the summer. When we received the information from HR, Allie and I were surprised at the dollar amount, and it was quite a bit higher than the year before. So we asked the HR department to take a deep dive into our health insurance bills to really analyze what had changed. And what we found is that there were 18 additional health plans compared to a year ago on our health insurance plan. And for health and dental, historically, we budget in September. And then it sits for the year. But we had a significant number of changes happen to health and dental. One of the things that when we come back to this topic of Fund 10, it's evident that having a contingency of $100,000 for a budget of our size is just no longer sufficient to be able to handle the type of things that do occur during the year. So that's one of the things we'll come back to. Cash flow borrowing interest. This is another audit one. So on our balance sheet, we don't actually pay our cash flow borrowing bill until it's due in October. However, for audit reasons, we're required to put on the balance sheet funds to be set aside to pay that back. So that was $123,818. Our ESSER 3 funding, all along, we had planned as an organization to split that over several years, which we had done. And in this fiscal year, we ended up maxing out or utilizing our full ESSER 3 funding. We ended up with $138,000 in eligible expenses above and beyond what our allocation was for ESSER 3. So we maxed out our ESSER 3 funding, which all along was the plan. It's just the total eligibility for costs was about $138,000 higher than the funding. Food service deficit. So the food service fund 50 is not allowed by state law to have a deficit. So if there's a deficit, Fund 10 has to pay for it. So that deficit almost is entirely made up of maintenance and equipment. Our kitchens are aging and we have significant issues in them regarding the equipment and the maintenance of that equipment. So basically, like, I think it was 57,000 of the 63 was maintenance. So that's going to be part of our next conversation under item B, is how to allocate those maintenance expenses. And then the next one, again, that I think budgeting moving forward, I think we're going to have to make a change. I've been here 24 years and we've never budgeted for what's called employee termination benefits. However, I think we've gotten to the point where we have to moving forward. Employee termination benefits are anything that somebody would have earned. It could be a custodian who has 2 weeks worth of vacation. They end up resigning on June 15th, and then we owe them that payment. It could be an administrator who had banked vacation days. It could really be any employee who had termination benefits owed to them. And as Brian has shared with the HR committee, the number of folks in the organization now that are over 50, it is likely that this is going to be an item that we need to be budgeting for instead of just seeing what happens at the end of the fiscal year. So there's definitely some budgeting, in my opinion, some budget changes that need to be made moving forward in Fund 10. Allie and I would like to come back to all of this when we have more time, which would be at the October meeting. But there is something that if the board wanted to do it, you could do this at the September board meeting. Rebecca, will you go down a little bit?
Steve, before you go there.
Yep.
You know, with the ESSER funds, those are, you use that money after the fact, right? You gotta make the expenditure. and then
Yes.
before it.
Yep.
And those are some costs, right? So why would they be part of ESSER deficit?
Sure. So at the end of the year, basically, what we do is we look at all of the people that were eligible for ESSER 3 funding, their salary and their benefits, as well as the North American Mechanical HVAC contract. Ally adds that all up. And then puts the claim form in. Now, she's been doing claim forms all along, but puts the claims in. The total, I would say, eligibility for costs that we could have claimed was 138,000 more than what was remaining in the funding, basically. So that has to then be covered by the district, in effect.
Well, we've already covered.
I mean, we have, yes, it's just not coming back, right, as a reimbursement, yep. If you want to scroll down, Rebecca. So the possible action item for the committee, and this is just something that we want to stay right there for a moment. So I've put in the notes as a reminder what the public referendum question was in November of 22. And what's important to note is at the end, where the referendum references district-wide renovations, capital maintenance and site improvements, and acquisitions of furnishing, fixtures, and equipment. That gives the board flexibility when it comes to allocating costs for district-wide maintenance in general, and things like equipment replacement. So I'll give you the example that I gave you about the kitchen for a moment. Kitchen equipment, brand new kitchen equipment or a repair under DPI regulations can be coded to Fund 50. So Fund 50 is the food service fund. If your Fund 50 has a deficit, you can pay for that out of Fund 10. So Fund 10 is the general fund, and ultimately Fund 10 has to make food service whole. Or Fund 49, if your referendum allows it. So our referendum allows it, but we have not put those expenses into the Fund 49 at this time. So what I'm mentioning in the notes here is we do have about 998,000 of eligible district-wide maintenance, furnishings, fixtures, and equipment that's currently allocated to Fund 10. Those costs can be allocated to Fund 49. The board could allocate those costs, which then would change the fund balances between 10 and 40. A very good question would then be, okay, so if we reallocated those district-wide maintenance expenses to Fund 49, what does that look like? So Ally and I put in the notes here that Fund 49 currently has interest earnings of 6.5 million. So that's from the 2 borrowings. So we have completed 2 borrowings of the 175 million. Interest earnings have exceeded expectations and are documented right now at 6.5 million. 5 million of that amount has been allocated to capital maintenance projects approved by the board, leaving 1,512,000 in funds that are not currently allocated. We also have 2 future borrowings that will earn interest. We also have over $2.5 million in contingency funds remaining from the Heritage Elementary project. So I also want to talk a little bit about the timing. So next week, Friday, is the end of the 23-24 fiscal year for the DPI. So what happens is our auditors have to go in next week and give the final confirmation of the numbers, and that's due by Friday. So any decision that you may want to make regarding this topic can be done at the board meeting next Monday night. And then our auditor can certify that by Friday. So there still is time if there is an interest in doing it. So the choice that would be there is leave the treasurer's report the way it is right now, which can be done. So the numbers remain as they are, nothing changes. Or the board could make a decision to allocate district-wide maintenance and equipment purchases out of Fund 10 into Fund 49. And they'd be allocated against the interest earnings that have been made. So that's really, the question for the board is, would you like to see your Fund 10 fund balance higher than it currently is? Or are you fine with where it's currently at and you want to leave the flexible money in Fund 49? It's definitely a decision that would be a board-based decision. Things that would play into it if I was a board member. You have a fund balance policy for Fund 10 that has a goal of working towards 15%. I will tell you that that is a tremendous challenge right now. When we see our Fund 10 expenditure growth occurring, Ally and I did a calculation that we would have to go into 24-25 and set aside $675,000 allocated towards nothing to be able to keep a 15% goal for fund balance, just because the numbers are getting bigger. So when you take like 15% of like 65 million versus 15% of 68 million, our fund balance is sliding backwards no matter what. Just by the nature of our Fund 10 budget becoming larger, our fund balance is sliding backwards. So the question then for this committee and ultimately the board next Monday is, do you want to take a reallocation approach, which you have the authority to do under the referendum, to move district-wide maintenance and equipment from 10 to 49, or do you just want to leave it where it's at? Basically, Jack?
Why wouldn't you do that?
What's that?
Why wouldn't you do that? Reallocate it? Because, you got the funds, right? And what would you use those funds for?
One reason maybe you wouldn't do it is if the board had something very specific and targeted that the board wanted to do in Fund 49. So an example of that could be, let's say the board wanted to, I'll think of something very expensive, go into the existing middle school building and replace all the windows, all the lighting, and the clock bell and PA system, of which those three things would be over $3 million. So let's say the board wanted to do that, and that was more important than moving, the funds from Fund 10. So that'd be an example. That if there was a larger, bigger picture goal, there's a reason why you'd want to do that. But otherwise, you have the legal authority to do it, and there's still time to make the change if you want to.
So what are the limitations on use of the interest from the referendum?
Yeah, good question. So I should have covered that in the notes. So there's three things that can be done with Fund 49 funds. Number one, they can be used with the legal authority of the referendum question. So they can be used with anything that you see up above that the public voted yes on. That's the first thing that can be done. The second thing that can be done is we can lower the debt service levy in Fund 39. So remaining funds in Fund 49 can be utilized to drop the levy in 39. And connected to Fund 39 is we can borrow less. So an example of that is the public has given the board the authority to borrow up to 175 million. That doesn't mean the board has to do that. So on that last borrowing, the board instead could say, we're going to short this by 2 million or 2.5 million and not borrow the entire amount of money. Those are really the three things that can be done with it.
So in some ways, I mean, this is a one-time fix for this year. we get to this point next year, we're still gonna have to deal with the limitation of funds versus expenses for the 25-26 school year, correct?
I would say, Mark, we have to address 24-25 beginning in October.
Yep.
I don't think we can go into 24-25 knowing that there are those expenditures that don't have a budget aligned to them, and I think we have to correct that.
Yeah.
And then I think if we correct it in 24-25, and it may come through reductions in other line items. Then in 25-26, we put ourselves in a better situation moving forward. We may not be able to correct it all. But I do think we have to begin that process, which is why Ally and I want to bring this back. The topic up above, which had all of those costs that contributed to the deficit. We want to bring that back in October because we do have to problem solve through all of that. We can't go into 24-25 knowing we have $100,000 contingency, and just the year before health insurance changes alone were $210,000. Because otherwise we'll be in the same spot next year.
So if you sit down and say, you're gonna, reallocate it, you put that towards one-time costs, right? Which would, really have some of the other funding for some of the other stuff. Because you're looking at, all the, a lot of the, food service equipment, we've been talking about that for several years now. Being challenged.
Right.
So if you could, put that funding towards one-time allocation. You're in a better position.
Yeah, and I would say there's probably 2 to 3 fiscal years of flexibility for the board on this issue. 23-24, 24-25, and 25-26 are all gonna be years where flexibility exists in Fund 49, just because of how well the projects are doing. And the fact that we have those interest dollars sitting there. Because we had mentioned in the notes, we still have 2 more borrowings to complete. Those will also earn interest. Plus the middle school has a sizable contingency as well. So Fund 49, the strength of it is that it gives us flexibility with district-wide maintenance and the equipment, fixtures, and furnishings for the length of the referendum period. So we not only have 23-24, we'd have 24-25 and 25-26 with flexibility for those specific target uses approved in the referendum.
So, the previous referendum, we had, X number of dollars set aside for that. And that went into like $2, right?
Yep.
So are you suggesting then that 300,000 be moved out of Fund 10, because that's where it is now, right? Into Fund 49.
No, what I'm,
So
the other question, I would suggest leaving.
300,000 would stay within the Fund 10. Right?
Yep, and what we have the ability to do is allocate those the interest earnings, and then ultimately the board will have to decide on what to do with the heritage savings. You can allocate Fund 10 district-wide capital maintenance projects and equipment to Fund 49 instead of Fund 10.
Okay. So you wouldn't touch that.
I would suggest not, yeah.
I'm comfortable with the allocation and I think it's the right way to go. We don't have to cover it today in the interest of time, but at some point in time, I'd like to revisit the 15% that's the policy.
Yep.
Is that the right number? It may have been determined at an earlier time and that made sense at that time. It doesn't make sense now. I would like to come back to that and see if we need to adjust the policy. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I know, I agree totally, and yet. Part of the reason for having that 15%. Is credit rating, but also these unforeseen expenditures, so that you're not scrambling to come up with money to cover it, so. I agree, I support the concept, I think we need a robust discussion on what that number should be. But I would support that motion.
Or is that something we're voting on?
I would like a recommendation one way or another for the board meeting next Monday.
So we're voting on this here to be allocated funds.
Maintenance from Fund 10 to Fund 49. That's a tune of 900,
$998.
998.
Do I have a motion?
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. And we will definitely circle back to the top part of that agenda item, which was the causes of the deficit, the fund balance and all that. We're gonna bring that back. All right, Rebecca, let's move on to the next item. All right, so operational referendum communication plan. So this is the agenda item where we did receive some public feedback on. And I want to just talk to you at a high level for a minute about what we've included in here and what we're looking for at the September board meeting. So there's a couple of things that are really important that I just want to mention. Because I'm gonna just keep saying this at all of the meetings that we end up going to, just to make sure the public is clear on it. This is a 25-26 operational referendum, 26-27, not 24-25. So that's one of the most important things for us to get that message out, because that can definitely be confusing. Secondly, the financial information for this referendum is different than the last two. So the last two, the board approved a debt service defeasance approach, which was the board was either going to approve a tax levy that included a debt service defeasance, which is paying down debt at a faster pace than you otherwise have to, or the referendum would have been approved and the funds would have gone one way or the other. This referendum would best be described as a more traditional referendum communication, where you put information out to the community and you basically say, if this is voted for, the additional cost is X. Because we don't have a debt service defeasance on the table, this would look similar to what we did in 2014 when the intermediate school referendum was presented to the public. So there's two documents that are attached. We're going to spend time on just looking at one of them. The timeline is just a document that's going to evolve as we go, as meetings get added. If you as a board member see something on there that you think we should add in, we're always happy to do it. That's just our first attempt at starting to put together, who we're going to go visit and the information we're going to get out. The second one, Rebecca, would you pull that up? So this is the start, I'll call it a draft of a presentation that we're going to ultimately put together. And I want to get to the tax piece because I think that's kind of the crux of the communication. Rebecca, if you want to move on to the next, we can keep going. Keep going. Right here for just a minute. Okay, so I want to talk about this type of presentation. So to begin with, 24-25 has the information from our third draft of the budget. It's important to know, as board members know, 24-25 won't be finalized until October. So we're showing 24-25, and ultimately when a communication goes out, we're gonna have to put an asterisk by it and say, third draft of the budget pending final, October decision. But what 25-26 and 26-27 does is it shows the increase for the amount above the 8.1 million. And so I want to be really clear on that. The 8.1 million that we are asking to renew on a permanent or recurring basis is in the 24-25 levy. So when you look and see the 24-25 levies at $9.16, that is in there. What isn't in there are the second and third components of the referendum. The second part is the $1 million over 2 years for hourly pay. And the third part is the inflationary component, which is the non-recurring part. If the board were to approve both of those in the 25-26 budget, if the public approves it, we would see a 32 cent per $1,000 increase in property value, or $160 on a $500,000 home. The feedback that we received through public comments indicated a preference of having 25-26 and 26-27 shown as if the vote is yes, this is what it would be. If the vote is no, this is what it would be. So that's something for you as board members to be thinking about, is the approach that we take to present this information. The slide that you're seeing in front of you only adds the amount that's not included in the base tax levy for 24-25. So we're not asking for a decision today. I'm just asking for you to think about it. You can also, of course, think about the public comment you received. And this is going to be on the agenda for the September board meeting. Jack?
One of the things we talked about is the inflation. And there must be, some projections on inflation the next 2 to 3 years, right? And is there a way that you can present this and say, if your inflation's going this way, your tax increase would be X. If it's going this way, your tax consequence would be Y.
Sure.
Yep. I don't know if that would be more confusing.
Yeah, I definitely know what you're saying. And to add on to this, one other thing I want to mention about this graph. This graph takes a conservative approach and assumes no property value growth in 25-26 and 26-27. That is a more conservative way to present this. Rebecca, do you want to go to the next slide? Just for discussion's sake, because I wanted you to be aware of it. If you go to the bullet point at the very bottom, real property growth of 3% in 25-26 would absorb 29 cents of the 32-cent increase in the tax rate. Just so you have information on like what would real property growth look like. But with that being said, that doesn't factor in the state budget, which is a much larger issue for 25-26 and 26-27. Because the governor has approved $325 per student out for the next 400 years. If state aid doesn't come along with that, that's going to result in a local property tax levy increase. So although I put that in there as an example, I think a better approach, Rebecca, if you go to the previous page, is not to assume that real property growth is going to take that cost away, but instead take a more conservative approach and say, that is the true additional cost if these questions were to be approved, excluding anything that might happen with the state budget. I think the question for the board members is, the public comment you received requested a different look than this, which would be in 25-26 and 26-27, there might be one color that says yes, and that would be the column I have there right now. And then there'd be another column that would say if the public votes no, and then you would see what that looks like. It'd be very easy for Allie and I to add that and calculate it. But just so you know, as board members, that's what the public comment was about, and it's something for you all to be thinking about. The other thing for you all to be thinking about is we have traditionally sent mailers home to everyone's home those are at least $5,000 a mailer. In 2022, we did 3 of them. In 2020, we did 2 of them. The question is, are you comfortable with that type of a communication plan and that type of an investment? Or would you prefer that we go other routes to get the information out? So that's another thing we wanted to prompt your thinking on, is for next Monday night. Your thoughts on really the communication, your thoughts on the investment, should we be doing mailers to people's homes? And obviously, in addition to that, we have the plan in there that shows the different locations, at least tentative. Mark?
Another thing I think we should consider, and I don't know how to deal with minimizing verbiage, because that can communicate and obfuscate everything, but I think somehow we need to remind our constituents that this isn't a surprise referendum. For both the previous referendums, we said we would have to be coming back because they were not occurring. And so, you know, that kind of explains where that 8.1 million is, and they need to be aware of it. If it doesn't pass, we don't have the funds in it to meet our needs. And so somehow I think we need to remind the public that this was in the plan all along to maintain our programming as it is.
Before we decide on whether or not to do mailers, I'd love Annie's perspective. I think that those suit the purpose for a certain portion of the community that wouldn't see the alternative forms of communication. So I see how at least one may be necessary, because that's the only, and then there's another segment of the community that instantly recycles things like that and doesn't bother to read them, depending on what it is. And I really look personally to electronic communications. So, you know, between the paper, electronic forms of communication and the mailers, I think we need to strike a balance there, and that'll hit that, making that information accessible to everybody.
So no request for action on this, just to put it on your thought process, and then we're gonna bring it back next Monday for the regular board meeting.
Yeah, I guess my comment, you know, does everybody really look electronically or at the newspaper? You know, if you want to hit this, you know, the mailer seems to be, you know, a way to do every household, so that everybody has a understanding of what's going on, whether they recycle it or not. You know, it's just like electronic communication, you know, I just think that we want to mix them. So I think, you know, you have to at least consider at least one.
That's why I said a balance.
Okay, so final topic, and we'll just take a couple of minutes on this. So you're gonna hear more about this at the September board meeting. So on Friday, this past Friday, Dr. Brown, Allie, and myself met with our legal team regarding this topic. We're actually scheduling them to come into our closed session in September to talk through the legal issues regarding this program. To get any board members' questions answered regarding the legality of our projects and this program, and what would need to be done or not need to be done, depending on the type of reimbursement level that we'd be seeking. At a high level, we wanted to share this with both the budget committee and facility committee today, so you'd have a chance to think about this before next week. The topic here is the Inflation Reduction Act and a program called Direct Pay. We've put in a 2-page overview for anyone who wants to learn more about, in general, what this topic is about. But basically, for the first time ever, forms of government that don't pay taxes have the ability to receive a direct reimbursement from the federal government for infrastructure costs that are going into improving either existing facilities or new facilities, like a geothermal heating system. This program carries significant requirements as well in order to meet the legal requirements of the higher reimbursement levels. We've been working with a number of people on this topic. We've been working with Wifley, which is the CPA firm that the board hired to assist us with this. We've been working with a legal team to work through the issues from a legal perspective. We've also been working with Vogel for quite some time on the program requirements and trying to put costs associated with that. So we're going to begin with a closed session next Monday with the attorneys that we're working with, talking through the legalities of this program and making sure that board members can get your legal questions answered. Because obviously this is one of the larger financial decisions that the board will be asked to make. And it's not only connected to the middle school. So it's important to note that the school that is opening today for students also could be eligible for federal direct pay program. And the legalities are incredibly complicated for Heritage because of the timing of when that project started, when it ended, when the program requirements came out. So what you see on your screen is information from the financial lens regarding the middle school. But we're still working on that as well, because Allie and I are trying to set up a meeting with Wifley because they are going through the process of identifying what the total scope of the claim could be as far as the direct payment back to the district. So think about this. If you've got questions, bring them next Monday. We will have 2 attorneys zooming in. That's their specialty, is really this topic. And any legal questions that you might have or contractual questions you might have, you'll have that opportunity next Monday to jump into that.
I guess one of the things I'd like to know is how much, you know, what's there some cost, you know, in accounting, legal, just to get to this point.
Sure.
And that assuming that that 1 million doesn't include those costs.
No, we can get that for you. So more to come on this next Monday night. And that's all we have for you today.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Sorry, thank you. Would you